All right, welcome back to Photography After Hours. We are here with our guests today. We have Susie, Sprague, and Scott, and my name is Nick. And our topic today is going to be, is Photoshop photography? So our topic again is Photoshop photography. We're going to try to tackle this in 20 minutes or less. So it's a huge topic. We want to kind of stay on task, and we really want to see if we can kind of debunk this whole theory that once you start editing stuff that it's really not photography anymore. So we always start with Sprague first for some odd reason. We don't know why. We've only had 3 episodes, but it's like we go right to Sprague because I could see him and I have to like turn and look at Scott this way. So Sprague, tell us a little bit about what you think. Once you start getting into Lightroom or any editing, we're just using Photoshop as the big one, but there's tons of editing programs. Once you get into editing, is it no longer photography?
Well, I think that a lot of people kind of wonder where you transition from an actual photograph to basically using your camera as a sketch pad to make a piece of artwork. And I think that, you know, particularly with Lightroom, you're probably just, you know, tweaking a few settings just to get a photo into a little bit better form. But yeah, when you get into Photoshop, I think that's when you're trying to get something that's got a little bit more drama to it and that's got a little bit more intensity and that sort of brings your photo up to something that's more interesting to look at. So in my view, I think Photoshop is photography.
Okay, cool. All right, so that's all for today.
Yeah.
So Scott, you know, what are your views on this? I know you're we go back and forth with this when we go out and have a drink like this, and we'll go sit there and talk about this stuff. So what are you thinking about it?
Compositing is a necessity. It really is. You know, I know there's a lot of purists out there, and they think that photography has to be straight out of camera. If it's not straight out of camera, then you know it's not real. It's not genuine art. Honestly, you know, I can understand that, and there is a place for that, like, you know, photojournalism, things like that. Sure, you know, that kind of stuff is out of camera. You don't alter the scene, you don't alter the image, and I get it. And yes, there is a place for that. But in today's world, especially in commercial photography, wedding photography, compositing is an absolute necessity. You cannot do it without it. You cannot do the job without it.
So Susie, is straight out of the camera, is that a true form? So when you go out there and you take a picture, isn't the camera doing some kind of editing and processing to that JPEG on the back of your screen?
JPEGs, yes. There is a certain degree of processing that happens within the camera. There's logic that compresses the file and interprets the colors and things like that, and fixes to a certain degree a white balance and things like that. So, and obviously we all try to shoot raw so that we have control over those types of things in the post-processing part of our workflow. Scott brought up photojournalism, and I think that that's probably the key example of where the purist methodology applies in photography, but I'll argue that even war photography and some photojournalism has some editing done to it in order to bring up shadows and things in order to depict the scene as seen by the eye.
Because sometimes stuff's happening so quick that you can't get the right exposure to, you know, things that are just going on, and you don't have time to sit there and change every setting.
Or even cropping, things like that, in order to eliminate elements in the photograph that don't help to tell the story.
So what's this whole, like, you know, trust me, you know, I'm not the biggest advocate of Photoshop. I like to get it right in the camera. You know, is there a line between getting it right in the camera and going too overboard?
Well, let's define what getting it right in camera is.
I call it pre-editing. You know, if there's a stop sign there and I can duck down and get it behind Sprague and get the shot, I don't have to edit that out now. I do it out of laziness. I'm very lazy, so I'm going to get it as best I can in the camera. and most of the photos you see on my Facebook feed and everything have 5 minutes or less of editing. There's very few that I really go overboard. So I'm trying to get the exposure right. I'm trying to get all the settings as close as to what I am envisioning, and what I'm seeing, so that I don't have to do a whole lot. Am I going to bring the shadows up and clarity and bring some of the detail in the clouds? Yes, but that's not click, 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 done. Put it on Facebook, and you've seen my photos. I don't have the best photos. I don't have the worst photos, but they are par above a lot of the stuff you see that is out there. And I'm not doing anything magical. I'm not sitting there doing major edits.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about just, basic developing, to get your blacks and your whites and, adjusting your midtone. I mean, yeah, every single photo needs that because the camera can't do it. It just can't capture it that way. So, the notion of getting it straight out of camera, the camera can't get it right to begin with because it only has a certain range, and within that range you're never going to get your blacks and your whites in the full range. It needs to be processed. So to that respect, yes, every photo needs that. To the other respect, as far as like compositing wise, yeah, I agree. The less that I have to edit, the better. And I'm always trying to compose so that the fire hydrant or the trash can is out or whatever is out, so I don't have to take care of it later. The type of editing that I'm talking about as a necessity are, say for instance, wedding photography. I'm doing a group shot. There's always that one person who's got his eyes closed, who's not looking at the camera, not smiling. So I have to take 3, 4, 5, however many it takes, and oftentimes I'll do head swaps just to get that perfect group shot.
I've done that to my grandmother.
And it's a necessity. You have to do that.
It was like, move your head.
We did a photo shoot last week with Vincent, and I composited that image. I was trying to go for a shot. We took several takes on that shot. I didn't get the perfect shot, but if I were to combine elements of all the other shots that I photographed, then I can get that one perfect shot. And of course, he also had a cigar in his mouth. And so we couldn't light the cigar just because of we couldn't light the couldn't light the cigar inside.
Those pesky
inside.
laws.
So I lit it in post-production, and so that was a creative thing. Again.
So bouncing it over to Sprague, my friend Joel Grimes came and spoke for PAC, and he was talking about don't be a photographer, be an artist, because then no one can tell you you're doing it wrong. Do you believe in that? Do you not believe in that? Would you rather be the artist and do whatever you want, because now the world is your palette, you can do whatever you want, or do you want to be that photographer where get everything right?
I would. I favor what Joel does. I mean, he does outstanding work, and Joel has got a business and the income to show that it works. I mean, obviously, he's got a lot of high-dollar clients who need images that really convey their product or their artist, whatever. And nobody's ever sold a picture straight out of the camera to anybody. I mean, it's basically a snapshot.
Well, what he's doing is real. He's taking a picture of the background, and he's taking a picture of the foreground studio, and he's just mashing them together. It's like a mashup in music, which you're familiar with.
And he does something really hideous, and I don't want anybody to scream, but he does it in HDR.
Yep. So Susie, when you think about it as music and mashups, and no one sees any of this as a problem, why does everyone flip out when you start talking about compositing and Photoshop, and everyone has they're so opinionated? What's the problem with it?
I think because everybody's definition of where the line is between purist photography and the portrayal of an event that occurred and artistry, that line is at a different point for almost everybody. So they argue over where someone has crossed the line, and it's interesting to see in the discussion boards how heated some of those conversations can get. People are very entrenched in their values.
Very closed-minded a lot of times.
Sometimes.
Like this is the only way. But So Scott's our techie person. Are we not seeing differently than our cameras? How many stops of light can we see versus the camera? So is what the camera's seeing really straight to the camera? Is that real life of what you're seeing?
No. No.
We could see more, right?
Oh, by way more. The camera can never, no camera can ever capture what we see with our...
So by editing or HDRing it, we're really seeing what we can see with our eyes. So really the camera's crippled. We're just helping give it a crutch.
Yeah, it's a limitation. What we see, what we perceive, the camera is always going to have a limitation. It's just never going to. That's why HDR became such a big deal. Now, I don't want to get into the HDR
push it to the 100 again. We talked about this in the last episode. Don't need to use everything to 100.
People need to. There's good HDR and there's bad HDR. I don't want to get into that topic, but but even photography. I think what a lot of people think is that because it's a photograph, it's picture realistic. It's photorealistic. The reality is that a camera is a tool, just like a paintbrush, just like anything. You use different paintbrushes for different effects. Well, the camera, because it's so lifelike and it's so realistic, people think that what the camera sees is what you should see. But the reality is that you use a wide-angle lens, you're going to get distortion. You use a telephoto lens, you're going to get compression. By mixing up what you use as far as a camera arrangement, it's going to illustrate that image in a different way. And so that in itself is not a realistic depiction of what we see. So
you had a point?
Yeah. Along that same line, in terms of just the physical aspects of producing a photograph, even our predecessors, right, prior to digital, and for the last 150 years or so, they used particular techniques to manipulate the development of an image using controlled exposure of light and balances of chemicals in order to develop that negative film. And even prior to that, other techniques, right? I don't know all the details, but there are daguerreotypes and all other, types of media that were used previously. And there were quite complex methods to go about bringing forth the image that they wanted to convey. And
very true.
Sometimes people bring up Ansel Adams as the example of, either side, right? Shoot like Ansel Adams, he did nothing to his photos, and then you have people that are like, no,
Ansel
he
Adams
did a ton.
Tremendous things.
Yeah, he did a lot, not only just from scouting the location and all that kind of stuff, but in his post-processing workflow, there's all kinds of information.
Yeah, dodging and burning So that was editing.
Yeah.
A lot of the tools we use, Photoshop, and Lightroom, have the same control names: dodge, burn, this and that, because it came from the darkroom. So are we doing anything different than Ansel was doing?
Yeah, and I think we're just doing the digital version of developing, and that we've got more availability of those tools at our disposal, because you can literally go online, get the application, download it, and shoot and develop and produce your photographs beginning to end in the same day.
Yeah. So on that note, Sprague, you use a lot of stuff with plugins and everything. Is that taking it too far, or is that now just adding to your toolbox?
It is, and I don't care. I like doing it. Like we've been talking about, just about everything that we do for a photo is about cheating the light to give the image the punch that you really want it, from lighting modifiers when you initially take the photo, to, as Scott was saying, changing the point of focus with different types of lenses and focus points. And then the sensors that we have in the newer cameras have got really great dynamic range now, so the need for HDR probably isn't as much as it used to be. And
even Lightroom, I pushed a shadow slider, and it's like I don't even need to bring it to HDR. It just lights up. I'm like, it's in Lightroom 5. It's like magic. It's like ooh, and it doesn't make it all crunchy, as I used to call it.
Right.
And we can get to a whole other topic, but the Lytro cameras, you can pick depths of field out now. So you later. So you can be like, oh, I wanted to shoot there, not here. So there's all this stuff. Like, again, where does that even leave you? If it's out of the camera and you can pick your depth of field after, that's a whole nother big topic.
Yeah.
Well, in photojournalism, and I was talking to one of the Canon reps who used to shoot for the Sacramento Bee, and he said that it was very critical what they did, and he used it as an example. He had to get a picture of a helicopter landing on the roof of a hospital, and he had to shoot that at a really high ISO, and he says it wasn't the greatest picture in the world, but he says that's what they went with the cover because that was the best shot that they could get. It couldn't be modified, and he says they take it very seriously. They have to take a RAW and a JPEG. They have to save them both. They have to show that they're not modified, and they can't even delete a picture in the sequence because if they get sued, they have to, show a sort of a chain that shows that nothing in that whole string of photos was modified. So that's, probably the purest form of right out of the camera because you have no choice. And a lot of times when you're documenting crime scenes and things like that, you can't change it. But beyond that, I think.
So in wrap up, we have a couple minutes left. I know Scott and I had a conversation in regards to like the different contests out there. Like PPA has categories for this stuff. So how can it be? Oh, it's not a legitimate form of art, like Joel says, if PPA, who's the Professional Photographers Association or of America or whatever it is,
there's a whole category for it.
There's a whole category for compositing and for all this stuff, and they can let you edit in those different contests, right?
Right, and in WPPI they have the same kind of content. I mean, now there are categories where you're not allowed that.
Sure.
And I think in most of them you're allowed to do certain bits of compositing, as long as it was all shot in the same sequence. So for instance, I'll oftentimes, photograph my subject in a landscape, and I'll have my light stand very close to my subject, and I'll photograph them with the light, and then I'll take the light away and then photograph it without the light, and then I'll composite the light out later. And so, I mean, that kind of stuff is still acceptable, and it's still considered photography, and it's still because it was all shot in a sequence.
So you're layering it.
Right, and so that's acceptable. And so...
So where Susie is doing some stuff where she's adding fairies and different ones from different model shoots into one big...
right.
I'm a fairy and I never live it down.
Well, yeah, when you're taking bits and pieces from other things that were not from
Doesn't make you a bad person, though.
Yeah, but there's a whole category for it. And so,
So
acceptable.
are we all in kind of agreement that, like what Joel Grimes says, and in the photo behind me on the cover of Arizona Highways, where it was the 50th anniversary, I believe. It was a cover. He shot it in black and white. He broke all the rules. He centered it. He composited the clouds in, and he uses the example in all the talks I've seen. We just saw him in Vegas for PAC, and we had him in Arizona for PAC. That he said, I broke all the rules, but I knew all the rules that I was breaking, and he was shooting it for his living room wall. And then he just sent it over and was like, hey, check these out. And they had to call him back 4 times to even decide whether they were going to use it. And they're like, okay, we're going to use it. So if it's on the front of Arizona Highways, which is the purest form of photography out there, I think we've kind of debunked the theory that everything has to be out of the camera all the time. I think that's kind of,
A great
I think we
image is a
debunked
great
the
image.
idea of things being straight out of the camera, because there's really no such thing,
Anyway, yeah. So Photoshop, good, bad, thumbs up, thumbs down?
Sure.
Thumbs up, Photoshop
Thumbs
editing?
up for Photoshop.
Oh, yeah.
And fairies that wear boots.
And plugins, because plugins are sort of a hybrid between Photoshop and Lightroom. You can get the same effects in Photoshop on some things without having to go through the Easter egg hunt of finding it and cobbling it together in Photoshop, so it's useful for that. And then Photoshop has got some functions when it comes to actually stretching and compositing and removing objects that
some of these plugins are great. Some of them are lackluster. We're going to go into that in other topics when we have other episodes. We have a bunch of them that we've been beta testing and using. So we're not going to get into specific ones on this episode. We have a couple minutes left. Does anyone else have anything else that you want to add to Is Photoshop Photography?
I think they're hand in hand.
They work together?
They work together.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what you need to enhance the photo. Anything straight out of the camera is going to be a flat image just by the nature of the way that the camera takes it. And I think you aren't going to get anything that's really going to be compelling to anybody if you don't get it.
I think sometimes we're lucky and we have some that we have a shot that needs next to nothing out of the camera, but I think that is a rarity.
Well, you have to wait for it. I don't shoot as much as I did 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I was like everything, and then I'd have to, like, you know, it's not the spray and pray I wasn't going with, but I would shoot a lot of stuff to get very little. Now I pick and choose. We went out to California for that workshop. I shot like 15 photos in California. I didn't feel the need to shoot 500 or 1,000 or 2,000. You know, I picked and choose when to shoot, because if the light's not right, my friend Levi Sim, that talks about this, he's kind of like I'm a lighting snob. I want to get it right, so I don't have to do a lot of work. If the lighting's not right, why trouble myself later in trying to fix all this stuff in post-processing? So you don't want to usually use it for fixing it. You want to use it more to enhance, I think, is what we're getting at.
I think that's
Don't take a crappy photo and then try to fix it. Take a great photo and make it better.
Well, I think that the real controversy is when, you know, you start to see on like magazine covers and they're depicting, you know, women and actresses and actors as these perfect specimens with perfect skin, and they're skinny and they've been liquefied, and, you know, and they're depicting this as the image of what I think that's where the real controversy.
Yeah, like that's something realistic for people to live up to, when it's not.
I think that's the real controversy, is because a lot of people, you'll hear it in songs nowadays that, like, you know, you got to stop that photoshopping because that's not.
Yeah, I'm a Barbie girl in a Barbie world.
But I think that's where the real controversy. But the reality is that that's what sells. And advertisement
and compositing. Every advertisement's a composite. So, well, it was a great conversation. You have to make the decision for yourself. If you have comments, please leave comments and subscribe to our channel. A little bit about our sponsor. PAC is Photographers Adventure Club. We do all kinds of workshops, networking, seminars, photo trips. Check out our website at photographersadventureclub.com, and we'll see you soon. This was After Hours, and a big cheers out there. Cheers. Oh, you guys are coming this way this time.